Emma awoke the next morning to the soft hum of the city outside her bedroom window. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, illuminating the familiar contours of her room, yet nothing felt normal. The memory of last night's car ride with Martin Harley sat heavily in her mind, replaying in fragments. The quiet tension, the way he had looked at her, the words he had whispered that had felt like truth she could not deny. She sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers brushing the sheets absent-mindedly. Her heart still thudded with the echo of his voice. "Has anyone ever truly told you that you are seen?" David's soft footsteps in the hallway made her startle. She glanced toward the door, forcing a smile as he appeared, briefcase in hand, tie slightly crooked, hair mussed from sleep. "Morning," he said, brushing past her to grab a coffee mug. "Don't forget, big meeting today. You should stay out of the way while I prep." Emma nodded, a practiced smile on her lips. Out of the way. Always out of the way. The words tasted bitter on her tongue. She felt the pull of loyalty, of love, of duty, but also the unmistakable stirrings of something dangerous. Curiosity, attraction, and an undeniable longing she could not name. As David left, she lingered at the window, staring out at the quiet street below. Last night had changed. Something inside her, something subtle yet seismic. She had been shaken by Martin's words, by the intensity of his gaze, by the truth in his observations. She knew one thing. She could no longer ignore it. Later that afternoon, she found herself compelled to check her phone. A single message blinked. From last night, Martin Harley. "I shouldn't have said it last night, but I meant every word." Her breath caught. She stared at the screen, her mind racing. What did he mean? Why did he feel the need to send this? She felt a flush of something she hadn't felt in years. Acknowledgement, being understood, even cared for in a way that went beyond casual kindness. Emma hesitated, thumb hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to delete it, to pretend the night had been nothing. But deep down, she knew she wouldn't. She couldn't. Instead, she typed a cautious reply. "Thank you. I'll think about it." The response came almost immediately. "Martin Harley." "Good. That's all I asked. And that was it." Simple, restrained, yet loaded with a promise she couldn't ignore. By evening, Emma's thoughts were tangled in a web she could barely navigate. She had prepared dinner, gone through the motions, smiled at David's casual remarks, yet every word he spoke felt distant, muted, unimportant. Her mind kept drifting back to the car, to Martin, to the way he had acknowledged her as more than just someone's wife. She found herself pacing her living room, hands clutching a mug of tea she hadn't drunk, as she replayed every phrase he had said. "You carry more than most people notice. You deserve to be seen for who you really are. I couldn't not tell you what I saw." The words had penetrated a layer of her life she hadn't realized was dormant. A layer of loneliness, of invisibility, of longing for acknowledgement, not just from her husband, but from someone who truly understood her. That night, David's meeting had run late, and Emma found herself alone again. She tried to distract herself with a book, yet every paragraph blurred into the background noise of her thoughts. Her phone buzzed softly. "Martin Harley. If you're free tonight, I'd like to meet. There's something I want to discuss." Something important. Emma's fingers froze. Important. Her heart pounded at the thought of seeing him again. The rational part of her mind screamed warnings. "He's your husband's boss. This is inappropriate. Stop." Yet the emotional, raw part of her heart, the part Martin had touched, throbbed with anticipation. She hesitated, breath shallow. She couldn't ignore the pull, the curiosity. the quiet ache inside that wanted to understand what he meant. After what felt like an eternity, she typed a tentative response. All right. Where? By 8 p.m., she found herself stepping into the quiet elegance of a downtown cafe, a neutral public place that Martin had suggested. The space was warm, softly lit, filled with the low hum of conversation and the occasional clink of porcelain cups. The atmosphere was intimate enough to encourage closeness, yet public enough to provide safety, a buffer between impropriety and honesty. And there he was, seated at a corner table, looking as calm, collected, and impossibly poised as ever. "Emma," he said, standing as she approached, his voice soft yet filled with that familiar warmth. "Thank you for coming." She nodded, her stomach twisting in a mix of nerves and excitement. "I wanted to understand." He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please sit." They did, and for a few moments neither spoke. They simply observed each other. The familiar, polite recognition and the tension that had quietly built between them. Then Martin leaned back slightly, studying her carefully, his voice calm, deliberate. "You're aware, aren't you?" he asked, eyes locking with hers, "that your life doesn't reflect your true self, that you hide more than most people ever see?" Emma's throat tightened. I don't know what you mean." He smiled faintly, a knowing expression that made her heart flutter. "You do. You know it too well. You've carried it for years, haven't you? The invisibility, the careful quiet, the way you bend your life around others, always keeping yourself small." Her hands trembled slightly as she sipped her tea. She didn't know why, but she felt raw and exposed under his gaze. It wasn't malicious, not at all. It was recognition. Deep recognition that cut through her carefully constructed layers. Martin leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Emma, I want to suggest something. Something I wouldn't normally suggest. But tonight, I can't not." Her pulse quickened and a small part of her recoiled. What do you mean?" He took a moment, choosing his words with precision. "I mean, don't let yourself stay unseen. Don't live only in the shadows of others. I see your worth, Emma. And I think it's time you acknowledged it too." The words were soft, almost a whisper, yet they landed like stones in her chest. She didn't fully understand what he was suggesting. Was it encouragement? Was it a challenge? Was it something she shouldn't even entertain? Her voice shook slightly as she asked, "Are you asking me to leave David?" Martin's eyes softened, almost pained. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not asking you to leave anyone, but I am asking you to consider yourself, to allow yourself to feel seen, to experience validation, to not shrink for the comfort of others." The suggestion hung in the air, heavy, magnetic, impossible to ignore. Emma's mind spun with 1,000 questions, with guilt and longing tangled together like barbed wire. She had always believed that loyalty meant submission, that love meant sacrifice, that her needs were secondary. But here was a man, a stranger in some ways, offering her permission she had never given herself. Her chest ached with a dangerous mix of excitement and fear. Her hands gripped the teacup tighter, knuckles white. She could feel her body reacting, even as her mind screamed caution. "You don't know what it's like," she whispered, almost to herself, "to feel invisible for so long." Martin leaned closer, his gaze intense but tender. "I do now, and I can't unsee it. You deserve recognition, Emma. You deserve someone to notice the beauty, the depth, the strength inside you." Her eyes filled with tears, though she quickly blinked them away. She wanted to argue, to flee, to cling to the life she had always known. But at the same time, she wanted to understand him, to understand herself, to explore the possibility that life could be more than silent obedience and unnoticed sacrifice. He reached across the table, but not touching her, only moving his hand, as if to bridge the distance without crossing boundaries. "I'm not asking for anything improper," he said softly, "only for you to consider what it means to truly be seen." Emma's breath caught. The night stretched infinitely between them, every second charged with tension, with unspoken questions, with possibilities. She didn't know what to say, what to do, what to feel. All she knew was that she could no longer pretend she wasn't affected. And that, she realized with a jolt, was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. The cafe's low hum faded into the background. All that remained was the quiet, intense connection between them, and the unspoken suggestion that had shifted something fundamental in her heart. As they left, Martin walked beside her, their steps silent on the pavement. The cool night air carried the faint scent of rain, mingled with the city lights. "Emma," he said finally, stopping at the curb near her apartment. "Think about it. Think about yourself. That's all I ask." And with that, he left her at the edge of her life, her heart caught between loyalty and desire, safety and temptation. The life she had known and the life that had just begun to whisper to her. Emma watched high. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she slid into the passenger seat of Martin Hale's sleek black car. The leather smelled faintly of cedar and polish, a subtle luxury that only made her feel more acutely the difference between her ordinary life and this extraordinary moment. She closed the door gently behind her, as if closing it would also shut away her racing thoughts, but it didn't. The city lights flickered across his face as Martin started the engine, and for a moment silence filled the car. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy in a way that made Emma hyper-aware of her own heartbeat. She felt every brush of the seat beneath her, every subtle movement of her hands in her lap, and every stolen glance she tried to avoid. David had given his casual nod of approval, dismissing her to Martin's company of two, but now that she was alone with him, the weight of his suggestion, the one she hadn't yet processed, settled on her chest like a soft, persistent pressure. "Emma," Martin began finally, his voice calm, smooth, and deliberate. "You seemed uncomfortable at dinner." Emma swallowed, a dry tickle catching in her throat. I guess I was," she admitted softly. She couldn't quite explain why her nerves were so frayed. The evening had been normal enough, David's boss, a few colleagues, a celebration, but something about the way Martin looked at her, the way he spoke directly to her, as if her thoughts mattered, left her unmoored. Martin nodded thoughtfully, his hands steady on the wheel. "All that business talk, it's not your world, is it?" "No," she whispered, almost ashamed. "Not really. I enjoy other things." He glanced at her then, quickly, a flash of curiosity passing over his face before returning to the road. "Other things," he repeated, his voice softer now, more intimate. "Like what?" Emma hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. She didn't want to invite conversation too deep, not with David's boss in the car. Yet there was something in the way he asked, in the subtle tilt of his head, that made her want to answer honestly. "I paint," she said quietly, the words barely audible. "Not professionally. Just for myself. It's been a long time, though." A brief smile touched his lips. "Painting," he said, as if savoring the sound. "It's rare, you know, for someone to admit they love something just for the joy of it. Most people, they only do what is expected. I admire that about you." Her cheeks warmed, a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity stirring deep inside her. She wanted to look away, to shift the conversation back to neutral ground, but she couldn't. There was something magnetic about the way Martin spoke, a quiet intensity that made her feel simultaneously seen and vulnerable. The streets of Chicago blurred past in a cascade of neon and streetlights. The hum of the tires on asphalt was steady, almost hypnotic, filling the gaps in their conversation. Emma felt trapped in the car by more than the doors. She was trapped by the tension, by the words unsaid, by the flicker of something she couldn't yet name in Martin's gaze. For several blocks they drove in silence, each absorbed in their thoughts. She wondered if David had noticed her distraction, if he had ever truly seen her. The years had slipped by in routines and responsibilities, and somewhere along the way, she had learned to accept being quiet, being invisible in her own life. Then Martin spoke again, low, deliberate, with an undercurrent that sent a shiver down her spine. "You looked distant tonight." Emma shifted in her seat, uncomfortable, but not with him. Uncomfortable with the truth in his words. "I guess I was," she admitted, barely above a whisper. He didn't immediately respond, giving her the space to explain herself. Finally, he asked, "Why do you hide so much of yourself, Emma?" The question struck her like lightning. How could he know? How could he even guess? She opened her mouth to speak but found no words. In the back of her mind, 1,000 warning bells rang. He's your husband's boss. You shouldn't feel this way. But she did feel it. The car slowed as they reached a quieter part of town, where the street lamps cast long golden shadows over the pavement. Martin didn't park. Instead, he kept driving, his gaze occasionally flicking toward her, searching, assessing, gentle but probing. "You know," he said softly, "I've seen many people in my life. Some, they live without being seen. Truly seen, I mean. They go through the motions. They smile, they laugh, they play their roles, but no one really notices what's inside." Emma swallowed hard, her throat tight. She knew he wasn't talking about David, not directly at least, but she felt the implication deeply. For years, she had played her part, supportive wife, careful observer, polite and kind. And yet, in the quiet moments, she had felt hollow, invisible. Martin's voice broke through her reverie. "Emma, you are more than what the world allows you to show." The words were simple, yet they resonated with a force that made her pulse spike. She wanted to look away, to dismiss them as flattery, but she couldn't. She met his eyes briefly, and for a moment, the rest of the city fell away, the honking cars, the streetlights, the distant chatter of nightlife. It was just the two of them, alone in that car, the world narrowing to the space between them. He spoke again, softer now, almost a whisper. "I don't know if you realize it, but you carry more than most people notice. You have patience, strength, and a quiet fire inside. You deserve to be noticed for it." Her hands gripped the edge of her purse. Her mind screamed caution, warning her of impropriety, of crossing a line that should never be crossed. But her heart betrayed her, responding to the validation, the recognition, the sincerity in his voice. The car slowed even further, approaching her street. And then, in the sudden intimacy of that moment, Martin did something subtle but profound. He turned. To her, his expression earnest, his tone low and careful. "Emma," he said quietly, "has anyone ever truly told you that you are seen? Not just looked at, but truly, deeply seen?" Her breath caught. The question lingered in the air between them, heavy in charge, impossible to answer immediately. She wanted to nod, to deny it, to say something safe, but nothing felt adequate. The street in front of her house came into view. The familiar outlines of her driveway and the soft glow from her windows were comforting. Yet now they seemed distant, almost foreign. Martin didn't turn off the engine. He remained still for a moment, letting the words settle, letting her feel their weight. Then, finally, he spoke again, almost a murmur. I didn't want to say anything at dinner, but I couldn't stop thinking about you. I couldn't not tell you what I saw. Emma's fingers tightened on her clutch. Her chest ached with conflicting emotions. Guilt, longing, curiosity, fear, all tangled together. She had never experienced a conversation like this before. It was not a confession, not a proposal, not a declaration. Yet it was everything at once. She realized, with a jolt, that the night she thought would be ordinary had changed her irrevocably. Martin finally parked in front of her house. The engine idled. He looked at her again, steady, calm, patient, as if giving her time to process what had just passed between them. Emma wanted to speak, to thank him, to warn him, to run, but her voice failed her. Instead, she simply sat there, her heart hammering, her thoughts a storm she could not calm. Finally, Martin's hand moved slightly, a gentle motion toward the door. Take care, Emma, he said quietly. Think about what I said. That's all I ask. And with that, he opened the door, giving her space to step out. She did, her legs trembling slightly, the night air cool against her flushed cheeks. She turned back once, and their eyes met for the last time in the soft glow of the street lamp. Something unspoken hung between them. A question, a possibility, a future that might never be realized. As she walked up the driveway to her house, Emma realized her life had shifted. In the span of a single ride, in the quiet intimacy of that car, she had been seen, truly seen, and the memory would not leave her. That night, long after David had gone to bed, Emma lay awake, the echoes of Martin's words lingering in her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, the way he had spoken, the weight of his presence. Her life, it seemed, had split into two paths. The life she had always known, and the one that had opened in the span of a single, unforgettable ride. Emma stood in front of the tall mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the delicate pearl earring that David had given her years ago on their anniversary. She wasn't sure if the jewelry still suited her, but it was one of the few gifts he had chosen. Himself back when he had been more attentive, more present. She let her fingers rest against the cool pearl for a moment, her reflection staring back at her, not quite as young as it used to be, but still carrying a quiet beauty. Her black dress clung to her figure, elegant yet simple, not too daring, but not entirely modest either. She wanted to look presentable tonight. It was David's company dinner after all. Still, a nagging thought pulled at her. Why am I putting so much effort into this when he barely notices anymore? Are you ready, Emma? David's voice called from down the hall. He sounded impatient, as always when they were late. Emma took a deep breath, forcing a smile onto her face as she walked toward the door. Coming, she said softly, though she knew he was already scrolling through his phone by the time she reached him. David was dressed in a sharp navy suit, his tie knotted perfectly, his hair combed with precision. He looked every bit the ambitious corporate man he had become. When she reached his side, he glanced at her briefly, nodded, and murmured, "You look nice." It was a phrase he used often, too casually, like an automatic reply. She longed for him to pause, to really see her, to look at her the way he once had when they were younger. But tonight, as always, He was too focused on what lay ahead: the dinner, the boss, the impression he needed to make. The restaurant was one of those upscale places in downtown Chicago, the kind with white tablecloths, soft lighting, and a quiet hum of conversation that felt both sophisticated and intimidating. As soon as they walked in, Emma felt the difference. This wasn't her world. It was David's. At the center of the room stood Martin Harley. Emma had seen him before. Of course, at company events, in passing at the office. But tonight, under the dim golden glow of the restaurant lights, he looked different. He stood tall, shoulders broad, his dark hair streaked with silver in a way that didn't age him, but instead gave him a distinguished edge. His presence filled the room effortlessly, as if the very air bent toward him. "David." Martin's voice carried warmth, authority, and ease all at once. He shook David's hand firmly before turning his gaze toward Emma. "And you must be, Emma." The moment his eyes met hers, Emma felt something shift. His gaze wasn't the quick, distracted glance she was used to receiving from her husband or others in David's circle. Martin looked at her as though she were the only person in the room, as though he had been expecting her. "It's good to finally meet you properly," he said, his voice calm and steady. He held her hand just a little longer than necessary. When they shook, his eyes never leaving hers, Emma forced a polite smile, but her heart was already unsteady. She reminded herself, he's just David's boss, nothing more. Don't read into it. Dinner began with polite conversation and laughter, most of it circling around company projects, market strategies, and achievements Emma couldn't fully follow. David leaned in eagerly, his voice animated, his attention firmly fixed on Martin. Emma, meanwhile, sat quietly, smiling when appropriate, sipping her wine, and pretending not to notice when her thoughts drifted elsewhere. She wondered how many times she had sat in rooms like this, invisible, her presence reduced to a supportive figure in David's shadow. But Martin didn't let her fade into the background. Every so often, his eyes found hers across the table. When others laughed at David's joke, Martin's gaze lingered on her, as if gauging her reaction. When conversation drifted into technical jargon, he would turn suddenly, asking her something personal. "So, Emma," he said at one point, interrupting David mid-sentence, "what do you enjoy? I imagine finance meetings aren't exactly your passion." The table chuckled politely, but Martin's question was genuine. Emma felt the heat rise to her cheeks. No one usually asked her that at these events. "Well," she began slowly, "I enjoy reading and painting, though I don't do it much anymore. Life got busy." Martin's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Painting," he repeated thoughtfully, as if the word carried weight. "That's rare these days. You'll have to tell me more about it sometime." Emma shifted in her seat, unsettled by the way his voice made even casual words sound like promises. She glanced at David, hoping he had noticed, but he was busy explaining profit margins to a colleague. The night stretched on, filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and business talk. But for Emma, the room blurred at the edges. The only moments that felt sharp, alive, were the ones when Martin spoke to her, or when she caught him watching her, not with boldness, but with a quiet, knowing intensity. By the time dessert arrived, Emma's nerves were frayed. She didn't know why she felt so aware of him, why her chest tightened whenever his voice lowered. She kept telling herself it was nothing, that she was imagining it. But deep down, she knew she wasn't. When the dinner finally ended, coats were gathered, and polite goodbyes echoed around the room. Emma breathed a small sigh of relief, eager to escape the strange tension she couldn't shake. But then Martin's voice cut through the noise. "Emma," he said smoothly, his eyes on her, "why don't I drive you home tonight?" David and I still need to go over some details at the office. For a heartbeat, Emma thought she had misheard him. The words landed heavy, lingering in the air. She turned to David, expecting him to frown or object, but he nodded without hesitation. Yeah, that works, he said easily. I'll be home later. Emma's pulse quickened. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words refused to form. Martin's eyes held her steadily, not forceful, not insistent, but with a quiet confidence that unsettled her more than any demand could have done in that single moment. With the city, lights glimmering outside the restaurant's windows and her husband distracted by paperwork, Emma realized the night was not ending the way she had expected, and for reasons she couldn't explain. She wasn't sure if she wanted it to.